Okay, so today I wanted to walk through price discrimination, what it is, how to draw the diagram, and also importantly, how to apply it to exam questions. So let's start off with what is price discrimination? Well, price discrimination is where a firm charges different consumers different prices for the exact same good or service. That is very important. So it must be that we're getting exactly the same product or same service, but the prices being charged are different. Now, what you need to know as a starting point is an example, but also the three characteristics that need to be satisfied to allow a firm to actually price discriminate. So let's begin with an example. So let's say that you and I were to go to the cinema and we're watching the exact same movie. Would I get charged the same price that you get charged for a cinema ticket? Well, the answer is no, because I would be charged the adult fee, you would be charged the student or teen fee. Okay. In other words, there's a difference in price, despite the fact that we have or watching the same exact movie. That is price discrimination. Okay. Now, there are three characteristics that need to be satisfied, or three conditions, if you like, that have to be satisfied in order for a firm to be able to price discriminate. Number one, the first characteristic is that they have to have a degree of monopoly power. Right. Let me just clarify, because there's often a very common misconception about this word. Monopoly power does not mean they have to be a monopoly. Monopoly power is just a fancy way of saying that they have the ability to set prices. Now, of course, the more market share you have, the more monopoly power you have. So, of course, if you're an actual monopoly, then you have definitely monopoly power. But even smaller firms like a hairdresser, to some extent, have some degree of monopoly power. Not that much, but it still exists. So you just have to have the ability to set prices, which is, I think, fairly obvious. Number two, Number two is that you need to be able to separate the market into sub-markets with different PEDs. Right. In the example I gave earlier with students versus the adults. So we go to sub-markets with different PEDs. Okay. All right. So I'm doing a very shorthand. Right. What does that mean? If I think about it in terms of adults and students, the assumption is the adults, they are likely to be inelastic in demand. The logic is that adults are more likely to have an income. And therefore, even if you were to raise the price, they're not going to be that responsive to the change in the price. Demand is going to fall, but less than proportionally. Whereas the students, they are much more price elastic in demand because they have limited income, they're more likely to be on pocket money, etc. Therefore, they're far more sensitive to price changes, hence why you're going to offer them a lower price. We'll deal with that later. But the point is this, is that if we had the same elasticity, students and adults, it would not make sense to charge different prices because the profit maximizing price would be the same for both submarkets. So that's number two. Now, number three. Number three, before I actually explain or write out what number three is, I want to take you through a made up example. So if I just rub this out for a second and we go, all right, let's assume that we went to the cinema and let's just say hypothetically that a student ticket for a particular film is, let's say, £8. And let's assume the adult ticket is £13. Yeah. Mind my awful handwriting today. Okay, right. So if the student ticket is £8 and the adult ticket is £13, what we do together is we go and buy loads of the seats at £8, right? We buy loads of the student tickets using the machine. We then set up a little table outside the cinema. And as adults are coming by, we're like, oh, you're going to go watch the movie? Yeah. Okay, cool. We'll sell you a ticket for £10. Now, that's cheaper than what they'd have to pay if they went inside and paid 13 quid. And we make a £2 profit by selling the ticket at £10, right? Right. Besides the illegality of this, because this is illegal, you're not allowed to do this, what actually stops this from working? Why are we not able to do this? Well, think through your experiences of going to the cinema. When you're about to go into the cinema screen and they check your ticket, the person standing there, I like to call him Bob. Bob stands there and is like, "Oh, you got a student ticket. Can I see your ID, please?" Do you think it's expensive or cheap for the cinema to hire Bob? I absolutely guarantee you, Bob is on minimum wage. Like it is really cheap for the cinema to employ someone to just check that the tickets that you're going in with are appropriate, that you actually have student ID to prove that you're a student. In other words, if Bob wasn't there, everyone would just go buy. I wouldn't even buy the student ticket. I'd go and buy like the child ticket, like £1 or something, like the baby ticket. But the point is that they absolutely need to be able to police the scheme to ensure that the correct people are buying the submarkets are kept separate. Yeah. So number three in our list of kind of criteria conditions is that the cost of policing the scheme must be lower than the additional profit gained from price discriminating. Imagine hypothetically that in order for the cinema to actually know that you are the age that you're claiming you are, they have to invest into some like laser eye technology. Like, is it worth it? Well, obviously, no, it's not worth it because then it's too expensive. Yeah. It needs to be very, very cheap for them to ensure that submarkets are kept separate. Cool. Just to give you examples in real life, by the way, of this. So in real life on London Underground, Oyster cards. Don't know if you guys have noticed, but the Oyster card for a student makes a different noise to the Oyster card that the adult one makes. The adult one just does a beep beep, whereas the student one, it's like a whole sing song, like yeah. So it's like that. Then you've got like peak versus off peak tickets. Right, let's think about why there's different prices during those times. Peak hours, demand is heavily inelastic because people need to get to work, to university, to school, whatever. Obviously, they're going to charge a higher price then, right? Whereas off peak, typically it's like the elderly, maybe tourists that are basically going around on the train. You try and entice them with low prices. But anyways, how do I keep the market separate? Well, think about it. If I bought an off-peak ticket and I put it through the machine during peak hours, what would happen? It just wouldn't work. It wouldn't work because it's already programmed that it understands the barcode could be read and it can basically determine whether it's a peak or off-peak ticket. In other words, they've invested into that technology once and now they can easily police the scheme. Yeah. These are all examples of means by which you police the scheme. So number three, what you write down, please, is the cost of policing the scheme must be lower than the additional profit gained from price discriminating. Now, there's two cool words to add to this. This is to prevent, and I'll explain what these are in a second. This is to prevent arbitrage, which is spelled like this, and seepage, which is spelled like this. Okay, so let's talk about what arbitrage and seepage is. Now, in order for me to explain arbitrage, now I know this is pretty dated, but we're going to pretend that I am so down with the kids and super cool. When I drop this example, you'll be like, "Oh my God, how does this guy know about this?" Right, you ready for it? The best example of arbitrage that I can think of is Supreme. Thursday, 11 a.m. drop. What's up, people? Anyways, the point is that Supreme is such a good example of arbitrage. Because why did a lot of people buy Supreme, other than being cheap? But why did a lot of people buy Supreme? It wasn't to wear the products, it was to then sell it on. There was a whole second market because of the fact that obviously there was limited amounts that they basically issue each time. Those people who bought it, a lot of them would just go instantly and sell it on. In our example a second ago with the students and adults, if we were able to buy the student ticket at £8 and sell it at £10, we would be gaining profits of £2 per ticket at the expense of the cinema. That is arbitrage, yeah? So it's basically resale between the sub-markets at a profit at the cinema's expense or at the firm's expense. That's number one. The second concept is seepage. Right, the best way to understand seepage is through yours truly, right? This doesn't paint me in the best light in the world, but it's fine. So I don't know if they still do this, but I think Apple have a discount of something like 15% for students if for things like iPads and laptops. Yeah. Rewind about 8 years ago, and my laptop had unfortunately it's seen its final hour. I needed to get a new laptop. 8 years ago, I was not a student. So what do you think I did? I went into Apple with one of my students. They pretended they were buying the thing. They showed their student ID. I got it at a student discount. Thank you. Please don't sue me. Anyways, the point is that is seepage. If you have infiltration between the submarkets, that is seepage. Great examples of this, by the way. I mean, recently they tried to crack down on this, but Netflix, there was always that one friend, the legend, that basically pays for the subscription, and then like 10 people were basically accessing the account. That is seepage because you're having infiltration between the submarkets or one person's paying, right? Similarly, if your parents wanted to get, let's say, I don't know, a product from Apple where the discount is applicable, they obviously send you to go and buy it. What do you think they had you? Joking. Right. So they basically would send you to get it because you get the discount. They don't get the discount. Now, firms are well aware of this, by the way. They know this happens. They priced it in, so they still make tons of profit regardless. But that is the point, is that if you get excessive amounts of seepage, actually it may be problematic for the firm. It may not be worth price discriminating. So that's hopefully like a good overview of what the conditions are. Now, at Excel, only require you to know what is called third degree price discrimination. I'll quickly whiz through first and second degree for you guys to have an understanding, especially those of you that are other exam boards. First degree price discrimination is basically where it's all theoretical, where you're going to be charging every single customer the maximum price the consumer is willing and able to pay for the good. Yeah. The problem with that is, how in the world would you even know that? But let's say you were able to work that out and you charge them the maximum price they're willing to pay. Well, in that instance, if you think about what happens, consumer surplus becomes zero. Consumer surplus is the difference between the maximum price you're willing to pay and what you actually pay. Well, if I'm paying the maximum I'm willing to pay, I don't have any surplus as a consumer. It's all converted into producer surplus. So that is number one. Like I said, I'm not going to be examining on that. Second degree price discrimination is basically things like bulk buying. So if you buy in bulk, you get a better price than if you were to buy individual units. But let's just talk about third degree. And actually, third degree, I want to actually explain it through an example first, because or a past paper question. So you know what? Let me unshare screen, because a lot of people got this wrong. but it's one of those questions where you shouldn't really be getting it wrong. So let's open old spec. June 2000. Oh, is it January 20? I think it's January 2013, actually. Let's check. Right. So actually, no, I think it's June 2013. You know what? We'll find out if I'm right or wrong. Let's see. Fingers crossed it's right. All right. So the internet will just load. It was basically about charging different prices, or which of the following basically is an example of third degree price discrimination. Yeah. And they wanted you, no, it's not this one. It's a bit of a flop. Right. It's Jan 2013 then. So it was a question about price discrimination and whether charging different prices. Oh, here we go. There we go. Yeah, right. Here we go. So it says, which of the following is the best example of price discrimination? Right. So I'll give you guys a chance to pause the video and attempt it yourself and then replay it. And I'll just point out the two kind of the correct answer compared to the one that a lot of people mistakenly chose. Yeah. So the one that most people or a lot of people chose incorrectly that year was this B. An airline charges less for economy seats than for business seats. Okay, that is not price discrimination because even if it's the exact same flight, the service that you're getting in a business class seat compared to an economy class seat, the leg room and everything else, it means that this is not price discrimination. This is what we call product differentiation. There's a difference. Yeah. So this is not price discrimination. It needs to be the exact same good or service. The correct answer is D. A nightclub charges women less than men for admission. What does that tell us, by the way, about the PEDs? Well, it indicates that the demand amongst the females is elastic, whilst the demand amongst males is inelastic. Why? Because we're desperate. Let's not lie about it. They know it. We know it. They all know it, right? So therefore, that is why they charge a higher price for men to go into nightclubs compared to females. Anyways, right. Let's go back to the board. So now we've laid out, okay, these are the characteristics that need to be satisfied for a firm to be able to price discriminate. The other question now is, how do we construct the diagram to illustrate a price discrimination? Now, this diagram is one of the more complicated diagrams in theme 3, but I want to show you guys in a very systematic way how to construct it, and very importantly, to make sure that you actually understand it. Yeah. So just to clarify, by the way, third degree price discrimination is where a firm charges different consumers different prices based on geography, time, gender, or age. Those are the key things that you need to know. Yeah. So it could be based on geographical regions. It could be based on time, so like peak versus off peak, gender, we just showed that one, and time as well, and age, sorry, as well. So like students discounts or the elderly, etc. Yeah. All right. Let's deal with the diagram. The diagram is going to have 3 diagrams side by side. So we're going to have one here, and I'm going to have one here, and last one over here. Right. The first 2 are going to be the sub-markets, and we'll deal with those in a second. Yeah. So I'm going to do this through the perspective of a, let's say, cinema. Yeah. So I'm going to do it as View. I could do Cineworld, etc. So in the specimen paper, by the way, the question was about Cineworld, but let's just do View. So here is a View over here, and then we've got our quantity, cost/revenue, cost/revenue. Okay, right. First things first. One of the assumptions about this diagram, and it's a very fair assumption, is that if I were to go to the cinema, so this is going to be adults over here, or you went to the cinema as a student, would it cost the cinema any more or any less if I sit in the seat or you sit in the seat? Not how much money they make, what is the cost? Well, the cost is identical. The cost is the same regardless of whether it's me or you, an adult or a student attending the cinema and watching the movie. Therefore, the assumption is that marginal cost is constant between the sub-markets. So let's say hypothetically the marginal cost of providing or cleaning the seat is, let's say, 30p. Yeah, that means it's 30p whether it's adults or students. So we're going to draw the following. I'm going to draw a perfectly elastic MC curve, and I'm going to make our life easier, I'm going to set it equal to AC as well. Now, some textbooks don't do this, but I have a strong preference for you to do this. So this is MC equals AC, and finally this also MC equals AC. All right. We are going to work backwards. We're going to start on this diagram over here with View and then work backwards through the sub-markets. The starting point is I'm going to start really high up on the y-axis, somewhere over there. Yeah. And let's just work out why I'm going to draw the demand curve in the way I'm going to draw it. Do you guys agree that at the really high prices over here, The only people that are able to afford going to the cinema will be the adults. The price is too high, we'll assume, for students to be able to enter the market at this stage. Hence, the demand is going to initially be very inelastic because it's just the adults in the market. So I'm going to draw fairly inelastic demand curve, sort of like that. And then at a certain point, so I've just randomly chosen a point, make it so that it's above the marginal cost though, somewhere over here. Let's say now the price is low enough that students are now able to enter and they can afford to go to the cinema. So what happens to the demand curve? Do you guys agree that if the students now enter the market, their demand is elastic, and so now the demand becomes more elastic? So what we do is that point there, I'm going to now kind of kink it outwards that way, and that's AR is equal to demand. Okay, margin revenue is half the slope, so roughly it's sort of like this and sort of like that, because that's MR. Okay, profit maximization we know is where marginal cost equals margin revenue. So can you guys see that profit maximization occurs here? So I'm going to call that QE. And the price is determined by going up the demand curve, and that's PE. Yeah. And if you think about it, if that's the price they're charging and that's their cost, because that's average cost, this area is supernormal profit. And I'll label all the supernormal profit areas at the end. Yeah. Okay. Right. Now we've done that. Honestly, that's the most complicated part of the diagram. Everything else from here is unbelievably straightforward. Let's begin with the students. Is the demand amongst students elastic or inelastic? Well, we explained that it's elastic. They have limited amounts of income. Do you see the point where I kinked the demand curve over here, where it became more elastic? Well, I'd like you to start at the same point on this and make it fairly elastic. Yeah, so let's do it like that. That's AR equals to D. Margin revenue is half the slope, so sort of like that. Profit maximization occurs where MC equals MR. So this is the quantity that we're going to be selling to students. And this is the price that students pay. Yeah, P2. Now, if you want it to be super duper geeky, and I love it, do it. Yeah. If you're given figures, and you often are, by the way, for price discrimination questions and data response, instead of writing P2, you'd actually write whatever the price is that they were charging the students. Okay. So you just put that in instead of P2, double application. It's amazing. Anyways, right. Finally, the adults, are they elastic or inelastic in demand? Well, the adults are inelastic in demand. Do you see where I started all the way up there on the y-axis? Start at the same point somewhere over there, make it fairly inelastic. So sort of like that. Let's do AR equals D, and margin revenue is half the slope. Go like there. It's MR. Profit maximization occurs where MC equals MR. That's Q1. And again, I go up now. I hit the demand curve there, P1. And that's the supernormal profit area again. Yeah. Again, to clarify, if I have a price there, I could actually write the price in rather than writing P1 generically, but it's very good. Right. Let's just put that so that it looks nicer. Okay, right. And the final thing is I just shade that in and write SNP to represent supernormal profits. Right. Let's clarify a very common misconception about this diagram. A common misconception about this diagram is that people think that 1 plus 2 equals 3. Not true. What this diagram is actually showing is that third diagram, that one with view over there, is if they did not price discriminate, the price that the firm would charge is PE. And therefore, by price discriminating and charging a higher price for the adults and a lower price for the students, what they end up generating in revenue exceeds, and therefore profit exceeds, how much they would gain if they just set one universal price. In other words, when I describe this diagram, I go, by separating the market into sub-markets and charging a different price for the adults and students, View would generate more profit than if they had set one universal price of PE. That is very important to clarify. Yeah. So this is the diagram that I want you to ideally draw. Now, if you're running short on time in the exam, you can get a lot of the marks and you'll be credited if you just drew the sub-markets. So just this and this as well. Yeah. All right. Let's now start to develop it in terms of exam questions. So let's begin with a section A question. And then I actually want to take you guys through the 3 types of questions that can come up about price discrimination. There are only 3 questions that can realistically be examined. Let's deal with all 3 of them. But let's start off, to make sure this all made sense, with a section A question together. So let's go back to this. And it is June 2017. Yeah, Unit 3, June 2017. There's a really good question in here. Okay, right. This is the question, right? So you know what? I'm gonna actually do it so we don't have multiple choice. Let's make it more exciting for ourselves, yeah? So it says, a monopolist supplier of holidays to a small island resort splits the market into 2 sub-markets. Automatically, by the way, when you underline that, you should be thinking, okay, price discrimination, clearly, yeah? One for school holidays and the other for term time. The diagrams show the average revenue and marginal revenue curves for holidays in the 2 sub-markets. If the marginal cost of providing one holiday is £200 at any time of the year, what prices should the holiday firm charge in the two submarkets to maximize profits? Okay. I can't emphasize the importance of underlining keywords and not rushing through when you're reading questions because you could easily miss the most important sentence. Because hopefully you recognized the most important sentence by an absolute mile is this. If the marginal cost of providing one holiday is £200 at any time of the year, that is crucial to understand. In other words, you know the diagram I drew earlier where I said, imagine the marginal cost of like get providing like cleaning up the cinema seat was 30p. The marginal cost here is £200 at any time of the year. So instantly we can now begin annotating this diagram. And what we can do is we can go, all right, I know marginal cost is right here. So £200. Can you guys see that? So you draw a perfectly elastic line there. Yeah, and you label that right up there. That's MC. Do you guys see that? So marginal cost is exactly at 200 at any level of output. Yeah. Same thing over here. So I can also do it marginal cost here at £200 at any given time of the year. And again, let's label it as MC. Okay. We now have everything we need in order for us to work out the price. The first thing that you need to do to determine price is always get the quantity. And you should hopefully know that profit maximization, she's maximizing profits or the maximizing profits, is MC equals MR. Can you guys see that MC equals MR is right there? It's 150 units. And the moment I now have the quantity, I can always tell you the price by simply going up until I hit the demand curve, the AR curve to get the price. So I go up from 150, hits it there. They're going to charge £500 during school holidays. How much are they going to charge during term time? Well, MC equals MR is over here now. They get 200 units of sales, and the price is £400 in term time. And if I now scroll down, you'll be able to see that obviously we got the answer right together. Yeah. So 500, 400, the answer is E. Hopefully that was really clear. And if not, practice those questions. They've asked one or two since then in the new spec as well, but you just need to recognize that you need to know the marginal cost in order to work out everything else. Yeah. All right. So now that we've delved into kind of section A questions and now know what the theory is, let's deal with the three types of questions that you can be examined. I'll start with the slightly easier question and then build up to what I think is the hardest question they can ask about price discrimination. So this time we're going to go new spec. So let's just close this. Let's go into the new spec. And the first question we're going to do is a very recent paper. It is 2023, and it's about Netflix. Some of you, I'm sure, have done this question by now. Yeah? So 2023, June, there's a 15 marker about the impact on profitability of Netflix, basically, or streaming services, price discriminating. Yeah. All right. So let's quickly just whiz through this. There we go. That one gone past it. Sorry. Here we are. Using examples from Figure 2 or Extract B, discuss the likely impact of price discrimination on a firm's profits. Use a relevant diagram to support your answer. Okay. Right. This is one of those questions where, you know how normally 15 markers, I would definitely be expecting you to do 2 analyses and 2 evaluations. I don't really think there is much else you can do in terms of the analysis except to really develop why they're going to charge different prices in the submarkets, draw the diagram, explain the impact it has, and therefore profits go up. There isn't that much more that you can say. So I would do one really, really chunky analysis, and I guarantee you it will get nothing less than 7 out of 9 of the analysis marks because it will cover everything we need to answer the question. So let's just deal with it together. Obviously, you price discriminate because you're going to make more profits. That's our starting point. So one likely impact of Netflix price discriminating is that their profits are likely to rise. That's your topic sentence, yeah? You now zoom in, and you can either do it geographically because the extract talks about how they charge different prices in different regions. I think students and adults is fairly straightforward. So you could do it that way. You can go, oh, students are likely to be elastic in demand. Their PED is likely to be greater than 1. You now explain why. You talk about how they have limited amounts of income. They're unlikely to have a job. They're likely to be relying on pocket money. Therefore, Netflix offering students a lower price is likely to result in a more than proportionate increase in demand amongst students and therefore higher revenue for Netflix. That's the first bit. Then you now deal with the adults. The adults are likely to be inelastic in demand. Why? The PED is less than 1 because of the fact that they're more likely to have an income. Therefore, they're less sensitive to price changes. The increase in the price for the adults is therefore likely to lead to a less than proportionate decrease in demand and thus higher revenue again for Netflix. You then draw the diagram that I just drew a second ago. The only difference is that you don't write view, obviously, you now write Netflix, yeah? Adults, students, Netflix. You explain the diagram. You go, by charging different prices in the submarkets, and again, you'd be quoting from the figures, by the way, or the extract. I'm sure I can't remember exact numbers, but I'm sure it shows, yeah, there you go. Like it shows student price, for example, 4.49 compared to like the normal price for adults, basically 8.99. Yeah. I'd say that was Amazon. Whatever. Yeah, do Amazon then. Yeah. Whoever. Yeah. And you just explain that basically by separating the market into sub-markets and charging different prices, they essentially are able to generate more profits than if they had set one universal price. That is the analysis. That is literally enough depth to be able to get really, really high marks. Yeah. Now, 15 market, I want two evaluations, and I think there are two excellent evaluations. The first evaluation is there is very likely to be seepage. Yeah. Seepage is essentially where there's infiltration between the submarkets. We spoke about earlier how people might be able to share their tickets, or not their tickets, sorry, their subscription or their login details with their friends or family, especially if it's family. For example, like if you know, your parents and you've got a student discount, there's no way of knowing that the parents are watching. It's in the same household. Yeah. Now, in that, you can develop it in even more detail by talking about how the cost of policing it might be so high. So the extract mentions that Netflix have invested large amounts of money to like track IP addresses and really try to clamp down on kind of password sharing. But the cost of doing that might mean that it's so high that the profits may not necessarily rise. It may not be worth doing it, basically. Yeah. So that's the first eval. It's a great eval. Second eval, I always, those of you that have been taught by me before will know this, I always bang on about how there are clues in other questions. In the data set that you're given and the questions they set you, there are clues. Do you know what the clue is here? The A marker. The A marker is with the reference information provided, examine the likely numerical value of the cross elasticity of demand between the UK online streaming service. Right, I'm not going to delve too deeply into this, but XCD tells me whether the goods are substitutes or complements. Why is that relevant here? You know how we're assuming the adults are inelastic in demand? Well, they might not be inelastic in demand. And the reason why they may not be inelastic in demand is because now there are alternative options available. Disney Plus, Amazon, or Netflix, whoever it is you're talking about, like alternatives to whatever is the company you're talking about is. In other words, maybe the demand amongst adults may not be inelastic anymore. It may actually be fairly elastic. In which case, raising the price for the adults, rather than resulting in a less than proportionate decrease in demand, now it might lead to a more than proportionate decrease in demand, and hence you may end up making less revenue, not more revenue. It might backfire, and therefore profits could go down. Yeah. That works, by the way, in almost every single context, but there will be substitutes available that you might be able to switch to. In the specimen paper, they had a question about Cineworld price discriminating, and again, it was about impact on profitability. Yeah. The easy evaluation there is okay, there are alternatives to the cinema now, Netflix, streaming services. People can watch movies at home. Therefore, if you continue charging high prices for the adults, they might decide, you know what, I'll just stay at home and watch the movie. I'll just wait a couple of weeks for it to come out on Netflix or Amazon. I don't need to go to the cinema. So, in other words, the assumption that we had that demand is inelastic amongst the adult may not necessarily be true. That is the first type of question. You guys with me? Let's go. Let's now deal with a slightly harder question. Slightly harder question is from 2020, one of the COVID years, and it looks like this. So let it load. Right. Question is as follows. 15 marker again. Discuss the likely benefits of price discrimination to rail passengers. So we're no longer dealing with the impact on profitability for the firm. This is, I think, slightly harder, but still pretty manageable. Yeah. My first analysis for this type of question would be as follows. Well, do you guys agree that it's clearly beneficial to the students? The submarket who gets the lower price, they're getting the lower price because the fact that they price discriminate offers them the cheaper price. Yeah. So why is that good for them? It means that it becomes more affordable. Allocative efficiency increases. It means that people who may potentially have not been able to afford it, maybe like low-income households, now can afford to go on the train. Great. That's the analysis. Evaluation, it's obviously bad for the submarket whose demand is inelastic because of the fact that now they're priced out potentially. The prices are higher. And bear in mind, by the way, that the demand amongst adults being inelastic, that is as an average. There are people within that submarket who have very limited amounts of income, who may not be able to afford going on the train now. And that, by the way, in terms of rail passengers, I can definitely link it to mobility of labor. I talk about how labor therefore becomes more geographically immobile. Adults who may potentially have needed to use the train to get from wherever to wherever, let's say like London to Birmingham, for a job, or Birmingham to London, they're going to struggle to basically afford to go on the train, and therefore they can't take up those jobs anymore. Yeah, that is the first analysis and evaluation. Second analysis, really straightforward, is the fact that the firms are generating more profits. This is where I draw the diagram now, illustrate the fact that they're going to make more profits, means that they could invest these higher profits into improving the quality of the train services. So both adults and students are now going to benefit through the fact that, you know, maybe there'll be less delays, the trains can be faster. I don't know, they can install like air conditioning or have a cafe on the train, Wi-Fi, stuff like that, right? So just to give a couple of examples and say, oh wow, this therefore increases dynamic efficiency, and that obviously benefits consumers. Consumers are therefore better off. Yeah. Evaluation. Question whether the rail companies are actually going to make more profits. Why? Because seepage. In this context right now, think about how most people buy um their tickets. Yeah. So think about how they buy their tickets. They buy their tickets typically online or from a machine, not from a human being. So therefore, it's very likely that seepage could occur. Yeah. And actually, if you look at the price differences between the two, by the way, it's actually massive. Yeah. So someone might decide, you know what, I'm going to buy 69, pay £69.50 and get the student ticket rather than pay the 105. I'll risk it. And therefore, the firm now incurs an extra cost because they have to now get inspectors to kind of check that the tickets are correct, and they're having to pay them obviously a salary, blah, blah, blah. So it might not be worth price discriminating for the rail company. Their profits may not necessarily rise. They may be offset by high degrees of seepage. Is that hopefully super clear? Just in terms of seepage, by the way, whenever you get a question about like whether seepage or whether price discrimination is a good idea or whether it's going to increase profits, seepage is really likely to occur online. Because let's say, for example, if like I'm buying some clothing from a shop that offers a student discount, and I call you up and I'm like, oh, can I use a student discount code? I type in, the student discount number, like your ID. It's not like my webcam turns on, like, you liar, that's not you. Oh, you busted me, I don't know. Right. Like, there's no way really for them to police it. Therefore, it happens very common, very, very often. And that's always going to be good evaluation to explain that actually profitability may not go up, it could go down because people might basically abuse the system. Cool. Last question, and then I'll wrap up the video. The last question, in my opinion, is the most challenging question that they could ask about price discrimination. Left the best to last. And it's the last time they examined it was back in June 2014. June 2014 has a question about Jessops. And I want to show you the question. It's a very good idea for you guys to actually attempt to do this question. So it's question 10C. Let me just get it to open. And it was a 12 marker. So bear in mind, in the old spec, they used to have a choice of data response. Oh, there we go. I've gone past it. There we go. Hi. The question says this. To what extent is price discrimination possible for firms selling products both on the internet and in high street shops? Okay, right. Let's just whiz through this. Do you guys recognize who this guy is? Some of you may potentially know who this is. Those of you that don't, it will tell you in the first part of the extract anyway. So the question is about kind of this camera company called Jessops. And it's very open-ended in terms of its wording because it doesn't say, is it possible for them to price discriminate between online and in-store? That could be one route you can go down. It could also be, could they price discriminate both online and in-store, for example, offering a student discount? Let's understand how to deal with this, yeah? So, the three characteristics that I talked about at the beginning of this video in terms of you need to have monopoly power. You need to be able to separate the market into sub-markets. You need to be able to police the scheme and keep it so that they are kind of the sub-markets kept separate. That is how you answer this in terms of the analysis, yeah? So, analysis number one, they have to have a degree of monopoly power. Well, there is quite a lot of evidence in the data that they do have monopoly power. Number one, they have 15% of the digital single lens reflex camera market. We're going to pretend we know what that means. Who cares though? 15% is a very sizable market share. That clearly allows them to set prices. Number two, another piece of evidence is that Peter Jones, the guy in the extract, describes how Jessops are like an iconic British brand. I can't remember exactly where he says it. It's somewhere here. Yeah. Oh, there you go. It's somewhere there. Yeah. So that. Oh, there we go. Iconic British brand. Yeah. He talks about how they've been around since 1930 something, 1935, I think it is. Yes, they've been around for a long time. So they've developed loads of brand loyalty. Blah blah blah. These are all evidence that they have monopoly power, and therefore, can they price discriminate? Well, yeah, they can. It's possible for this firm to price discriminate because they have the ability to set their own prices. Now, within that paragraph, by the way, there is, I think, a really clever point on the mark scheme that I really like. The way you can add depth to that particular analysis about the fact that they have monopoly power is him. He is so recognized. He's very famous because of Dragon's Den. He's like the main dragon. Everyone knows who he is. And it says it, by the way, so even if you didn't know it, he's best known, one of Britain's best known entrepreneurs. He is like a brand. And therefore, his association with Jessops increases their brand loyalty, increases their monopoly power, and allows them to price discriminate. That is a really clever point, I think. Yeah. The fact that they're associated with him gives them a higher degree of monopoly power. Yeah. That's the first analysis. Yeah. I'll deal with the evaluations in a second. Just want to show you guys what the analyses are. Secondly, can they break the market up into sub-markets? Well, I can do it in one of two ways, either between online and in-store. What is more elastic, online or in-store? Well, I'd argue online is a lot more elastic. The reason is because it's much easier to compare camera prices by just getting a new tab open and comparing it on a different website. Whereas in-store demand is fairly a lot more inelastic because there aren't that many camera shops and you're physically there. You've already made your journey to the shop, and therefore the demand may be more inelastic, hence the price is likely to be higher online, sorry, in-store compared to online. Yeah. And that's amazing. Alternatively, you can offer a student discount for both online and in-store. So online and in-store. And also I can add in that it's very easy for them to police that, especially in-store, because all they need to do is get you to present your ID. It doesn't cost them very much. So can they price discriminate? Can they separate the market into sub-markets? Well, the answer is yeah, they can. Yeah. That is the first analysis. Yeah. Second analysis, sorry. Let's evaluate. Number one, first evaluation. The first evaluation here is seepage, big time. Yeah. In store and especially online. Why? Because in store, if there's a student discount, your parents could just get you to go and buy the camera on their behalf with your student discount. So again, there's infiltration between the submarkets. So profits potentially could be falling for Jessups if they did decide to price discriminate. But the second thing is online, like we said earlier, is you literally really struggle to police online because there's no way of knowing that the person buying it really is a student. Yeah. So then again, profits again may be falling as a result of price discrimination. That's the first eval. Second evaluation, I think is so clever. I'll give you guys three evaluations. Obviously, you don't need two, just in case this one wasn't kind of instinctive. When you read the extract, and I highly recommend that you do, when you read the extract, it talks about how, like, when you go in store, you can try out the camera, you can ask questions of expert staff, enthusiastic staff, and you can create a calendar and all these things. You can make the case that even though you're getting the exact same camera, that if they're charging a higher price in store compared to online, it is not price discrimination, it is product differentiation because you get a different service. In the same way that in the paper we looked at the multiple choice with regards to like, which was the following as an example of price discrimination, the economy class seat versus the business class seat was not price discrimination, even though it's the same flight. The service is slightly different, and therefore that's why they would charge a higher price. Therefore, you could argue them charging a different price online compared to in store may not even be price discrimination at all. It could just be product differentiation. That is genius. That is such a clever eval. Yeah. Now, just in case that didn't instinctively come to you, no problemo. Alternative evaluation, very straightforward here, is to basically talk about how it doesn't make sense for them to price discriminate between online and in store. And it even says it in the data, by the way. Like if you read down here, it said that prices will be matched. There you go. Prices will match to those of jessups.com. In other words, the prices in store and online are going to be the same. And the reason why is because people have smartphones these days. So it doesn't make sense for you to charge a higher price in store compared to online because they could just check on their phone. They would know that the price on the website is cheaper, which is buy on their phone, click and collect. Like, I'm here, guys, give me the camera, right? So it doesn't make sense for them to price discriminate between online and in store because there are no information gaps. So the information gap is very limited. And therefore, consumers would quickly pick up on the fact that it's cheaper to buy online compared to in store. And therefore, everyone just buy online. There's no point in basically offering a higher price in store. Yeah. Hopefully, so it's a very long video. Hopefully that really clarifies everything that you need to know about price discrimination and that if it comes up in your exam, you're welcome.